we're good to go. Awesome. Well, everybody, welcome. I'm so excited to have you all here. I hope everybody is having a healthy and cozy January. I know it's been a little hectic and crazy for everybody, but we thought it would be fun with 2020 starting to focus on the old world for a new year. So our theme this month was based in Alsace, the region up in northeastern France. And it's always fun for us to be able to do a deep dig into some of these like classic regions in the world, because then you're really able to know just the nitty gritty about them and get to understand the producers more, the varietals, the geography, the history. So it's always just so much fun because there's so much to explore, as you all know, and this is just a great way to learn a little bit more. It's also, I think, really interesting too, because a lot of people tend to think red wine in the wintertime, but there are so many, not only year-round wonderful white wines, but wines that I especially love in the wintertime. And what I think of when I think about wines from Alsace is I think about wines with a lot of great texture and kind of more unctuousness, a lot more kind of that like great body. And then I also think of these beautiful aromatics too, which can pair so well with a lot of these cozy warm winter dishes, which are kind of the staples of a lot of Alsatian cuisine. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is introduce Nicolas. I'll let him do a little background into Alsace, and then we'll dig deep into the wines together. Of course, like any event, you can always feel free to ask questions just throughout. We're a smaller group, so we have the opportunity to do that. So feel free to, if you're on mute, unmute yourself and ask a question at any time. And without further ado, we have Nicolas here. So not only is he our fine wine manager at Waltham and grew up in Alsace, but he's worked in the wine industry now for around 15 years, working in distribution, importing, retail, and also, of course, speaks fluent French. So maybe, Nicolas, you can speak a little French to us throughout this experience, because we can all use a little culture. So I'll let Nicolas speak, and we're so excited to have him here. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Chelsea, for that introduction. Bonsoir. As we say in my part of the world, salut bisameux. It's a little mixture of French and German in the local dialect, so it just means hello, everybody. Another famous phrase we will learn in my part of Alsace, the north, we say "Sigilt" for cheers. In the southern part of Alsace, we say the more familiar "Gesundheit." So for those who are drinking already or tasting already, I should say, "Sigilt," as we say in my part of Alsace. So as Chelsea said, I've been in the wine industry for 16 plus years. I grew up with wine all around my family. I know it may not sound from Alsace because I have this accent. My mother is American, my father's French. I learned English when I was 4, so I never retained any sort of accent, except in English, that of someone who's from perhaps the northeastern part of the United States. My background really has to do with a wine region, yes, but also wine history in my family. So my grandfather and my great-grandfather were what we call négociants in French. Négociant is essentially how they were a key part of a number of wine regions, particularly in the east of France. So from Champagne to Alsace, of course, to Burgundy, some of the most famous négociants being Louis Jadot or Joseph Drouhin. And you also find them in other regions, but those 3 regions in particular. So essentially they would buy either unfinished wine, unfermented grape juice, grapes, and they would either make the wine, cellar the wine, but at the very least, they were the machine behind getting the distribution of the wine out to the general public. So, wine's always, yes, of course, I'm French, and my mother's side, I'm Italian-American. So wine has always been a part of my culture, but certainly wine has been part of my family history. With that being said, if no one has been to Alsace, I encourage everybody to go. Alsace is a tiny little sliver of a wine region tucked away in the northeast of France. And so if we think about it in terms of French vineyards, it seems kind of off and far, far away. It's actually not the most northernmost vineyard site in France. That belongs to Champagne, that distinction. And because we think it's in the north of France, we think it's also going to be cold. I think it's more helpful to view Alsace. This is where I weave in a little bit of history. I think it's helpful to think of Alsace really in terms of its history and its geography. So Alsace is at the meeting point of the two great culture nations in continental Europe. On the one hand, France, and on the other hand, Germany. Switzerland is also not that far away as well. And so we've got this region that's been from the get-go right on the border. And you have two natural borders. You have the Rhine in the east, which separates it from Switzerland and Germany. And you have the Vosges Mountains in the west, which separates it from the rest of France, as well as the Jura and the very southern part of Alsace, which also separates it from Switzerland and separates it from the Franche-Comté, where the Jura wine region is. It's also helpful to think about it as it being in the heart of the Rhine Valley and also being in the heart of Europe.
Nicholas might be having a couple technical difficulties as he is actually zooming to us from Gordon's on his iPhone. So I'll be back in, but in the oh, there he is. Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No stress.
So it's helpful to understand that really the meeting of is at the meeting point of a number of different cultures, French and German, but also Alpine, and was often referred to in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance as das Herz von Europae, the heart of Europe. So it's really the joining between Western Europe and Eastern Europe from Strasbourg, my hometown, which in German Straßburg means the city of roads. You are almost equidistant between Munich and Paris, Amsterdam and Rome. So it really gives you an idea of the centrality of the region. And in the Middle Ages and during the Renaissance, its wines were well-traveled. There's stories that its wines were at the table of the czars of Russia, a number of kings in Scandinavia. It was traded heavily by the Hanseatic League, also appeared on the table of Henry V, King of England. So a long, long wine history. What I think is fascinating about the region is its not only its geographical location, but its geology. So if we look at where it's located, because it's on a river and there are mountains, if you look across, if you're looking from the plains, or if you were, let's see, in any one of these mountain vineyards, the Sonnenberg or the Engelberg, which we'll get to taste later on, if you're not already tasting them, or you'll taste them at another point. If you were to look east, you'd see the Black Forest. And in fact, the Vosges Mountains in the western part of Alsace and the Black Forest in Germany proper used to form one massive ancient mountain range. And essentially what happened is, I won't bog you with geological details, but essentially what happened is because of movement of tectonic plates, this massive mountain range from the highest summit down just came crumbling down. And you had this major depression, which was then filled in with water, glacial water, and water from the ocean and rainfall, which became the Rhine Valley. In German, it's referred to as the Rheingraben. But what's most interesting is that on the western edge of those mountains, of that ancient mountain range, the Alsatian part, you find it a little bit in the Black Forest, but more so in Alsace. And I'm not just being parochial. Really what's fascinating is that you've got all these different soil types from different geological periods. So one of the great things about, let's say, Burgundy, for instance, for any of you that are big fans of Burgundy, or maybe there are those of you who are afraid of Burgundy because there's so many subplots, no pun intended. The fascinating part about Alsace is that you've got a number of different soil types. In fact, you've got more soil types than in Burgundy and more than in any other region in France. So even though we're the smallest vineyard region in France, we have the most geological diversity. And because we have the mountains in the west, that blocks us from weather systems coming off the Atlantic and also the North Sea. So while we are far north in France, we are protected from a lot of weather systems, and we do get a lot of sunshine, and we do get a lot of dry weather. In fact, we are second only to Perpignan in the Roussillon, so French Catalonia, in the far southwest of France, in terms of days of sunshine and dry weather. So that allows us for great development of fruits. That allows us to have wines of great minerality, and it gives us a wide palette already from the get-go there. Never mind the number of varietals that we have in Alsace. So as Chelsea mentioned before, we're not really a red wine region. We do have one. It was planted by Burgundian monks traveling up the Rhine River, and that's Pinot Noir, of course. We also have Pinot Noir's two notable mutations, Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc. There's also another one, part of the family, part of the Pinot family, less well known because it's usually not expressed as a single varietal, and that's Pinot Auxerrois. Then, of course, we have the giant of the Rhine Valley, which is Riesling, the king of all, I believe, the king of all grapes, but certainly the king of all grapes in Alsace. And I say the king of all grapes, again, I'm trying not to be parochial, but what I think Riesling does is quite incredible. Whether young, old, still, sparkling, dry, sweet, yes, not all Riesling is sweet. There really is an incredible range, and Riesling goes with a number of different dishes. As Chelsea was saying earlier, these wines will go well with venison. They'll go well with veal. They'll go well with lamb. They won't just, of course, they'll go well with poultry. Of course, they'll go well with shellfish, seafood, freshwater fish, a number of other things, pungent cheeses, particularly with more aromatic varietals like Gewürztraminer and even Pinot Gris, which is very expressive in Alsace, much more so than pretty much any other region. So there's really a great variety of grapes, soil types, and elevations. And the vineyards, if you were to look at pictures of where the vineyards are in Alsace, they're pressed up against the Vosges Mountains, and sometimes they run into little sort of valleys that run into the mountains. What I think what's unique about what we have tonight in terms of our Alsace choices is, one, we have a pretty broad palette of the different styles of wines that you have in Alsace, because we have a Crémant, and Crémant is what we refer to as sparkling wine from France outside of Champagne. And Alsace actually leads the way in terms of production of Crémant, hands down, versus any other region of Crémant in France. So more than the Jura, more than the Loire, more than Limoux, 30% of the total production of Alsace wine is dedicated exclusively to Crémant. Crémant, having been made for sparkling wine, has been made for centuries in Alsace, mainly because in cooler vintages, you kind of had a problem with varietals like Riesling, for instance. Riesling is a high acid varietal. It needs a lot of sunshine in order to develop that fruit. And in vintages where you have maybe a lot of cloud cover, or it's a little too cold or a little too rainy, that acidity is still going to be very, very vibrant and very present. So what do? You turn it into sparkling wine. And they didn't just do that in Alsace, they did that throughout the Rhine Valley. which is why you have all these Germanic sounding names in Champagne. They all left during the 1848 revolution and settled in Champagne. That's why I have names like Roeder and Tatange. Sorry for that little rabbit trail. But
Yeah.
if you think of it this way, Crémant is really in that same sort of mold, the Crémant d'Alsace. And what we have tonight, it's quite unique. We have a vintage dated extra brut Crémant. So a little bit drier than dry. Other regions would call this Blanc de Noir because it's only made, or Blanc de Blanc because it's only made from white varietals. But in Alsace, it's just Crémant. And if we're making a Crémant Rosé in Alsace, it's actually different than your Crémant Rosés that you would find in Champagne, which is a blend of both white and red grapes, vinified as white, blended with red grapes, vinified as red. That's how they make rosé in Champagne. In Alsace, it has to be 100% Pinot Noir and nothing else.
So Nick, as you're going into the Crémant d'Alsace, maybe we'll go to tasting the Bechtold for those who have it and want to taste it with us. As you had mentioned too, so you have the Crémant d'Alsace Rosé, which is typically Pinot Noir. But so we have for our Crémant here, we have the 2018 Bechtold Crémant d'Alsace, which is extra brut. And it's going to be a blend of 50% Chardonnay and 50% Auxerrois. So am I correct, Nicolas, that these are the two varietals that are typically used for a lot of Crémant d'Alsace production, which is non-rosé?
So non-rosé Crémant can be made from any of the following varietals, either as a blend or 100% Chardonnay, Pinot Auxerrois, Pinot Blanc, which generally tends to form the basis of most of them. So this is unique in that there's no Pinot Blanc here at all. Pinot Gris and Riesling. We're not allowed to use any of the aromatic grape varietals simply because, one, they're too aromatic, and two, they generally don't have enough body and or acidity. So this is unique in that we're having Chardonnay and Pinot Auxerrois, which produce both fuller bodied white wines done in an extra brut style, so that helps to retain the acidity.
And for those of you too who were members during our November box, which was a Beyond Champagne theme, it was actually focused on several different Crémants from different regions, including Alsace. So this is interesting because it's just two grapes, as our last producer that we worked with was, I think, around 4 or so grapes in the blend. So this is definitely really interesting. So the Chardonnay is here to kind of provide the freshness, I would imagine. Auxerrois, as I know it, and Nick, you might have obviously a lot more experience with the grape than I do, since it's not something you see all the time. I've always kind of thought into blend like in the body, as it's not as high, as the grape varietal doesn't seem to have as much acidity as you would find with the Chardonnay. What do you typically get out of Auxerrois from the experiences you've had with it?
Auxerrois gives real richness and texture to wines. Oftentimes when you see Pinot Blanc from Alsace, it's vinified dry, but if you notice, you may notice that a Pinot Blanc from Alsace may taste a little different than a Pinot Blanc from, let's say, Oregon, that's imitating the Alsatian style, or a Pinot Bianco from Friuli, or from the Alto Adige, the Sud Tirol, German-speaking part of Italy. And that's really because in Alsace, we're allowed to say Pinot Blanc and have it be anywhere from 0 to 100% Pinot Auxerrois and still call it Pinot Blanc. That's one of those unique anomalies of Alsatian wine tradition. The other unique thing about this producer that we're having, or this producer, the Crémant, is that Bechtold is a producer directly west of my hometown, Strasbourg. And most of the wines that we see from Alsace tend to be from the middle part of Alsace to the southern half. So it's unique that we find something really pretty far north in the region that's perhaps less, quote unquote, viticulturally prolific. But in Alsace, the part of the vineyards where Bechtold is based is called the Couronne d'Or, literally the Golden Crown. and it was once controlled by the bishopric or the Bishop of Strasbourg, who invested heavily in the viticulture in the region. And it was taken on by the people who worked the lands, like the Bechtold family. And so what we find here are vineyard sites that are pretty far north, where the Vosges Mountains are a little bit lower, and it tends to be a little bit cooler. So these wines will tend to have a little bit more acidity in comparison to the wines from the middle part or the southern part of the region. So that adds more to what we already have here with the Crémant Extra Brut. Add just more, an added dynamic of acidity. It's a little bit cooler for the Chardonnay, so it's going to be Chardonnay a little bit more like what you'd find in, say, Côte d'Auxerre or Chablis or Champagne.
It's wonderful. I'll make a note too that Domaine Bechtold will be exploring 2 wines from them tonight, and all of the wines we're tasting tonight 2 are from one of our favorite importers, Rosenthal, which for those of you who have been CruBox members for a while, you'll notice that we do use a lot of wines out of that portfolio, as once again, it's small family-owned growers, and that's like something that we love and something that we specialize in. Bechtold is 4th generation grower, and Jean-Marie Bechtold is the proprietor as of now. They're also certified organic too, and they got biodynamic certification back in 2016. Nick, from your experience too, in terms of biodynamic, working the vineyards, I've noticed that a lot of producers have started to get that certification. Have you noticed that as well? Or what can you say about biodynamic farming in Alsace?
There's something very unique going on really since the end of World War II in Alsace, really having to put their name back on the map and making themselves well known. You know, the shifting back and forth from two different states means that they were involved in, you know, two different markets, and so it seems like markets kind of forgot them on both sides because the Germans weren't very kind to the Alsatian wine market. So that meant the Alsatians had to get creative, and they've always been creative. So one of the things that happened, let's say at the end of World War II, is that they came up with the monovarietal labeling system, which is unique to France. Alsace is the only region where we have the name of the varietal on there. Other things have since popped up in the past 50, 40, 30, 20, even 10 years. The rise of orange wines. So Alsace is one of the leading regions in terms of orange wine production, but also in terms of organics or green, sustainable agriculture. So whether that means sustainable, organic, biodynamic, more and more producers are producing this way in Alsace, or tending their vines this way. Part of it has to do with kind of the Germanic heritage that we have, you know, with our friends in Switzerland and neighboring Germany, who are very environmentally minded. But really the idea in Alsace is that if things are organic and done biodynamically, we're going to have a healthier vineyard, and we're going to make better wines in theory because we have better grapes. So there's certainly been an uptick of biodynamic production in Alsace, but not just biodynamics, also a number of other green certifications.
That's great. I'll also say too, so for those of you who got to taste the Bechtold Crémant d'Alsace, or for those of you who are waiting to try it, it is quite a delicious experience, in my opinion. We've really enjoyed dabbling in sparkling wine these last couple months, and will kind of continue to do so, as there's just so much amazing quality to be had. A differential that I don't think went into about Crémant d'Alsace as opposed to Champagne is the minimum aging requirements tend to be less for Crémant d'Alsace. So Nick, tell me if I'm incorrect on this, but I think it's about 9 months minimum. for like the Cremant d'Alsace certifications, but at the same time, Domaine Bechtold holds their wines to much higher standards than that. So they actually age their wine for 2 years before release.
That's true. I would say the minimum, yes, is 9 months. Most producers, even on a mass scale, will usually wait at least a year. Some will actually go like the Champenois and go 2+ years, even 3 years. I mean, we have here vintage dated 2018. I don't know when he disgorged the bottle and added more juice and yeast, but I just don't have the specs in front of me. But that's not atypical to find producers that are aging 12 months or more. I think you used for a previous session, you used Meilleur Fonnet, Brut Nature, Cremant d'Alsace. And I believe he ages that for 18 months. So there what you get is a lot of the vibrancy of fruit and fresh.
That was a lighter. This has a little bit more texture, definitely a little bit more of those slightly like earthier undertones, but still like racy and like citrusy. It's just really gorgeous. It's a lot of fun. I hadn't had this wine in a while, so it was really nice to revisit it.
I think if Bechtold used Riesling here, you'd find much more acidity. So he made a wise choice here in using some Pinot Auxerrois, because then you would need to age it for much longer in order to get some sort of richness and texture out of the wine.
Anybody have any questions so far? I know we've been talking a lot. If you have any questions about the Bechtold Cremant d'Alsace, or just any questions about Alsace so far, I'll just open it up to you all to ask. And if not, we'll keep on rocking. Everybody's good. Wonderful. Amazing. Well, Nick, do you want to go over the Côte d'Amerschwir together?
Yeah. So Maurice Schuch from good grief, from Amerschwir. So this is another example of Alsace tradition. This, I would say, is actually much more traditional than any other wine we're tasting this evening, because this is a field blend. So for centuries, if anybody here drinks Burgundy, you'll know a Burgundy by its site name, rather than this Pinot Noir that I had from Burgundy. That's really how Alsace was for centuries. And Côte d'Amerschwir is kind of harkening back to those times when most great Alsace wines were field blends. I don't know that I would say this is great in the sense that it's some sort of elevated Grand Cru. It's certainly very good and very typical of what we would have as an aperitif before dinner, or lunchtime with, say, something like a whitefish, trout, for instance. This is a blend of mostly Pinot Blanc. Now, he lists 90% Pinot Blanc. There may be some Pinot Auxerrois in there, and then, or 95% Pinot Blanc, and 5% Muscat. Correct.
Yes.
I think
so 3% Pinot Blanc, 2% Muscat.
Okay, so there we go. I was completely off, but a very little bit of Muscat. The Muscat in Alsace, there are 2 different variants of it. Technically 3 different variants, but 2 are within the same family. The qualitatively high Muscat Petit Grain, which just means the little berried Muscat. And that's the Muscat of Alexandria. So originally of Greek origin, but known famously for where it was grown in the northern part of Egypt, Alexandria. And then there's Muscat Automnal, which is bigger and not as interesting. It doesn't produce as intense aromatics. The interesting thing of note in Alsace is that typically Muscat is going to be produced bone dry. So while it's aromatic, it's dry. So in that sense, it plays well with something that maybe has a lot of salts or something that has some aromatics that can kind of deal with muscat. But muscat, I always find just it smells like flowers. It's, you know, this may seem a little crass to say, but it smells grapey. You know, it actually is the one varietal that does smell like grapes, the type of grapes that you would eat. And it really adds a lot. Just that tiny little percent adds quite a bit to this wine.
It's just wonderful. So this is the producer. We'll be exploring 2 wines from them, Domaine Choche, which is out of Amersfoort, the village, which is where this wine comes from. They've been, I think, producers since 1650, and now they're under, it's called Domaine Maurice Choche because it's the last kind of, I think they reestablished the estate in like the, I think 1950s or 60s or so as Maurice Choche, and then his sons, after he passed away, Jean Leon and Sebastian took over the property. They also are practicing organic with a lot of biodynamic practices that they use, so they're not certified as biodynamic, and they make around 25 different wines in their portfolio with around 11 hectares of vineyards. So this was really interesting. I had been talking to Nick about this because I'm one of those people. I actually had a Muscat for last month's CruBox that was vinified in orange as an orange wine from the Roussillon. And Muscat is sometimes a grape that I can sometimes be a little taken off put by because of the fact that it does have such floral characteristics. And for me, that's sometimes aromatics that don't always please my taste buds. Everybody's different. But what I love about this wine so much is Pinot Blanc as a grape varietal can tend to be a little bit more neutral in terms of a lot of the aromatics that it throws to you. So the Muscat, just a tiny small percentage, just gives it a little added lift, which is just so pleasant and lovely, and kind of adds those like small notes of like honeysuckle and very kind of soft floral aromatics, which are very complementary to some of the more citrus, appley and bitter almond characteristics of the Pinot Blanc brings. So I was very pleasantly surprised by the addition of Muscat here. And I think it really elevates the wine, but it's still incredibly fresh and just so quaffable and easy drinking. Had anybody gotten to experience it? And are there any thoughts that you want to share or questions so far?
That's the one that I opened tonight, and it's very good.
Are you enjoying it, Christina?
And my cats in the background are playing with the wine cork from this.
I love it.
So that's what's happening.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's awesome. Wow, this is just like incredibly fun and fresh. It's aged in stainless steel here to kind of preserve those aromatic characteristics, and aged for about 5 months in stainless steel. And it's interesting too, all of the wines that we're tasting tonight from these producers are such small production. This is around, I think around 300 cases produced, whereas I think the Cremant d'Alsace is around like 500. So we're dealing with pretty micro production in terms of a lot of these wines, which just kind of show the artisanal nature of a lot of these family run producers. I had actually, Nick, put in our like CruBox insert that this would pair well with mouclard, which is like a mussel-based dish, and also any like raclette-based dish as well. Because while I thought you could do this with something like light and fresh, I thought it could also really tone down like a richer, cheesier based dish as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
You don't want to do it with something that's with a cheese that's too pungent.
Yeah.
But certainly doing this with raclette, this can handle cheese and potatoes. I mean, that is part of the staple of Alsatian cuisine, along with pork. Sorry if I'm offending any Jewish sensibilities. It's not necessarily kosher. That being said, these will go well with the dish. Like we have this saying in France that on mange bien, we eat well. And in Alsace, we say on mange bien et on mange beaucoup. We eat well and we eat a lot. And you know, the difference between our neighbors to the east and our neighbors to the west is that the base of our dishes may be more familiar to those who are German or Swiss German, or have German background or Germanic background. But really the art, the way that it's prepared, the sensibility is very French, the way in which dishes are prepared. And I would say that too with a number of the varietals. Some of the varietals may sound very Germanic and the names may sound very Germanic, but the style in which the wines are made are very French. These are definitely gastronomic wines, hands down, from the most inexpensive to the most expensive. These are really wines that are meant to be enjoyed with food, for sure.
That makes sense. So I guess I'll mention too, before we get into the next wine, that this obviously would be categorized under the Alsace AOC classification. You had mentioned that like the majority in what kind of Alsace is known for is it's one of the few regions in France that actually puts the grape varietal on the front of the label, whereas you have to guess sometimes or really understand the geography for so many different French wine regions. But this makes it a little simpler, except for when you get into the Grand Cru vineyards, which can get confusing. We'll get into that later. But this is obviously an example, the Côte d'Amechevier, of a blended wine. Can you speak, Nick, just briefly to, I know that they label Edelzwecker, is that correct? Blend and Gentil. Sometimes I've seen as like blended. Can you speak to that?
So the appellation system in Alsace is quickly getting more, I don't want to say more complicated, but it's evolving. As with anything, it's an evolution. The first AOC wine was Châteauneuf-du-Pape in the early 30s. Alsace, is kind of trailing behind. For the longest time, Alsace only had one AOC, and that was just Appellation d'origine contrôlée Alsace. That was it. Since then, we've added Crémant d'Alsace in 1976. It fell almost in line with Crémant du Jura and Crémant de la Loire. They were all kind of at the same time. In fact, I used to work for a winery that was one of the three wineries that helped create the appellation and standards for the appellation. But then you also have, particularly with these two, the Côte d'Amechevier and something like the Sonnenberg, you have particular designations for a nameplate site that doesn't fall within the Grand Cru system. So what's notable about Alsace as opposed to our friends in Burgundy is that we only have a Grand Cru system. We don't have a Premier Cru system. We do have a Lieu-dit system, like our friends in Burgundy have as well. But generally, there's this revamping going on where we'll have Crémant d'Alsace, Alsace, Alsace village, so it'll come from a particular village, Alsace Lieu-dit, literally name place, Alsace Premier Cru, and Alsace Grand Cru. And those last three, but particularly those last two, the top tier, the echelon, is really where the debate is happening amongst producers and therefore amongst the presentation for this rescaling of everything to the INAO, which governs AOC status wines in Alsace. And essentially the argument is, well, Grand Crus are really big. And remember, I was talking about geological diversity. In a place like Engelberg, you can find a plot that's more marl and you can find a plot that's more limestone. And sometimes it'll be a little bit of something else. And the question is, well, is there a distinctive site within Engelberg that is the Grand Cru site and everything else should be leveled down to Premier Cru? So it sounds like a lot of infighting between producers, but really everybody is really careful about putting Alsace forward in recognizing the best sites. So a lot of it has to do with rediscovering texts. How long have certain sites been written about? Engelberg has been written about since the last wine we're going to taste. Engelberg has been written about since the 8th, 9th century. So that's a long time. That's arguably a pretty good argument, number one, for there should be a Grand Cru because it's been recognized as such by a number of people for 1,300 years, or at least 1,200 plus. So it's a big conversation. I can go on and on about it, but suffice it say that it's more than just white wine, still and sparkling. And I didn't even mention the late harvest or wines that are affected by noble rot, which technically don't have their own appellation, but fall within the scheme of AOC Alsace wines or AOC Grand Cru wines.
So that would be the Vendange Tardive, late harvest, in the Selection de Grains Nobel. Is that correct?
Yeah. Vendange Tardive, VT for short, and Sélection de Grains Nobles, so selection of noble grapes, SGT for short.
Cool. Well, as you were speaking about it, I think we'll move on to the next wine, unless anybody has questions, feel free to ask. As we had talked about the fact that there are some single vineyard sites that are not designated as Grand Cru, and this is an example, which is the 2019 Domaine Schoch Riesling Sonnenberg, coming from the Sonnenberg Ludi. So this is, Nick, it's your favorite grape varietal here that we're expressing. And Riesling is Nick's favorite grape. So we're excited to showcase it. And it's something too that Gordon's we've always been really dedicated to as a varietal. It's a varietal that's extremely misunderstood. And I think Alsace is one of the best places in the world to represent it. So this is 100% Riesling, which is coming from the Sonnenberg vineyard. Also very small case production here, around 150 cases produced annually, coming from the granite soils from the Sonnenberg vineyard site. And this is aged for about 12 months in stainless steel. And then I think 2 years additional in bottle before release. Nick, would you like to speak to anything in particular? Have you ever had this wine before us having it, or anything from Sonnenberg?
I've tried, I've only ever tried Mauritius Sonnenberg. I would say for me, this is pretty typical. This for me is a benchmark of what Riesling is in Alsace and should be at its best. So something from a particular site, in this case, Sonnenberg, Sonnen, sun. So a very sunny place. So you get this great development of fruit. And Berg with an E in German always means mountain, as opposed to Berg with a U, or in French we add the O before the U, or the Swedes just dismiss the U and go with an O, which just means a fortified town. So in this case, this means the sunny mountain or the sunny hill. And that's because it gets a lot of sunshine. So there's granitic soils, which gives a particular type of minerality here. We have a lot of sunshine because this is a southeast facing vineyard. And we're talking about older vines. So we've got real richness and depth. We've got real minerality, and we've got great fruit all at the same time. Keep in mind, Riesling is fruity, but fruity doesn't mean sweet. And it's all got this great acidity and this great texture. And this is a wine that's super young, but that's what I also love about Alsace wines is, and this is what I love about Riesling at this stage, it's very expressive. And yet 2 years down the line, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it will continue to be very expressive. A number of years ago, I had a 1976 Vendange Tardive Riesling. So late harvest, not sweet at all. It was from, it was 1976 was a vintage. And it tasted as if it was bottled just yesterday. It was fruity, it was juicy, it had all this great acidity. And this to me is no exception. This really is the beauty of Riesling.
It really is. This wine, for me, is probably one of my, and I hate to say this because we love all the wines that we pick for CruBox, but this is definitely one of my favorites. It just the combination of the acidity and fruit and the minerality. It has a little saltiness to it. You get those kind of classic aromatics more in the stone fruit family, a lot of that peach, that nectarine. But it also has that really kind of slight briny quality to it too, which just makes me want to have it with shellfish, something light and fresh. But also, Nick, would you like to speak to some of the kind of classic Riesling pairings from the region?
So classic pairings would be pork, of course. For those who are less inclined, poultry, particularly a nice roasted chicken with honestly with garden vegetables that are just kind of lightly cooked off to the side, carrots and potatoes. It will go well with rich dishes that we find in Alsace, kind of classics, the choucroute garni, which is perfect for this time of year. So it's a sauerkraut that's cooked over a 12-hour period with juniper berries and white pepper and all different cuts of sausages and pork shoulder and whole potatoes and whole onions and carrots. So, and then it can also, will go with, like I said, freshwater fish. So that's the kind of the dynamic of Riesling. It also go well with a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it now. I can't think of it in French or English. This occasionally happens to me. But it also go well with things like venison or boar, rabbit, things that have a little bit of a wildness to them. The acidity of Riesling can handle more wild aromatics. And if those things are braised or roasted, that kind of helps to kind of calm down the wildness of those aromatics. So this is really quite a dynamic white wine here.
And in terms of its aging potential too, what would you say?
A site like this, made the way it is, with minimal intervention, which is pretty typical of Alsace producers. There's really no new oak being used at all, ever. At least certainly not with white wine. I would say this is a wine that easily would age 15, 20 years, no problem.
And it's you could put too, if you think about it, because this isn't a Grand Cru site, so it just showcases the fact that you can get incredible value out of some of these single vineyard sites that are not within the Grand Cru. And even too, as we get to a Grand Cru site next, you can still find incredible value if you're pairing it alongside what you find at a Burgundy or even the Mosel or other regions in the world. So
that's I'm glad that you mentioned that, Chelsea. That's a huge note. Starting with even the Crémant, and even now here with the Riesling, is the for what you're getting in the bottle, for what you're paying, you're really getting tremendous value as opposed to what you'd find either north of the border in the Mosel or the Saar or the Pfalz or the Rheinhessen or the Rheingau, or if you went farther southwest into Bourgogne or the Jura, where you'd be paying a lot more money for wines of similar quality.
So cool. Any questions before we move on to the last wine, the Bechtold Pinot Gris Engelberg? John, I think you might be on mute if you're trying to ask a question. I think John's trying to unmute. John, when you're ready, we're here for you to answer that question.
Oops. Oh no. Can you hear me or not?
You have another mic on.
Yes.
So you have to turn off the other microphone.
Okay. Anyways, it's a wonderful wine. That's all.
Awesome. Amazing. So we'll move on to the next wine if everybody's ready to talk about it, which is, I actually have my fill in it now, so I'll bring it over. It's a little intense. This is the 2012 Domaine Bechtold Engelberg Pinot Noir, which is a Grand Cru wine. I'll turn that off. What's so interesting is when we received this wine, I was really excited to be able to get a wine that has a little age on it. This has, of course, 10 years of age on it as of now. So it's definitely sometimes really fun to taste white wines with a little more age, as there is, I think, an overall misconception that white wines don't have ageability. And that is correct for a lot of white wines out in the market. But definitely Alsace is one of the, I'd say, top places in the world for age-worthy whites. So this is a great opportunity to speak to it. This once again is coming from Domaine Bechtold, where we had the Cremant d'Alsace. And this is going to be also super minimal case production, around 200 cases produced, coming from the Engelberg Grand Cru, which is, I think, limestone-based deposits with clay underlays. And this is actually aged in barrel. I'm pretty sure they actually get barrels, Domaine Bechtold, from another Rosenthal producer out of Burgundy, and they use neutral barrel for aging here. I think about a year or so of neutral barrel aging, which I've definitely seen with Pinot Gris from Grand Cru Pinot Gris in the past. So I don't know, Nick, if you might want to speak just to sometimes the different aging requirements of Alsace Grand Cru wines, and speak maybe just to the Engelberg Vineyard Grand Cru and some of your experience with it.
So just a quick note here. This is the first wine we're tasting that has that at least has spent some time in oak. Mm-hmm. As I was saying before, generally speaking, the oak that's used in Alsace is neutral. This is no exception. The only time where new oak would ever be used, and it's rarely 100%, would be with Pinot Noir. But those days have kind of died away since average temperatures are rising, which means that the Pinot Noir in Alsace is getting better and better. So we don't have to, as Neil Rosenthal likes to say, put on the maquillage with new oak and those sorts of things. So yes, there is aging requirement for Alsace Grand Cru. It has to spend 2 years in the cellar between barrel and bottle. That's at least that generally tends to be the market average. Again, this is a composite word, so we've seen the word Berg before, but the first part, Engel, is how you say angel in German. Keep in mind, this is from Bechtold is in the village of Dahlenheim, which used to be controlled by the Bishop of Strasbourg. So we've got a name with a slightly religious origin. Not atypical, particularly not atypical if you're used to Burgundy vineyards as well. What's unique about the Engelberg site is that it's limestone and marl. So limestone will give you really great freshness, highlight wine's natural levels of acidity, however high they may be. With Pinot Gris, that's significantly less important than, say, with Riesling, which has a high acid potential. But then you also have marl, and marl is a type of, it's like a compressed sandstone. So it used to be underwater. So it's a little bit gravelier, and it's going to give you a little bit more body, yes, but a little bit more minerality. I think what's unique here is really the barrel use borrowed from Burgundy, because typically whenever wines are put in barrel in Alsace, they're generally these massive casks that originally came from Hungary, because most of the barrels that you see in Alsace are 100 plus years old, that date from the period of time when Alsace was part of the Second German Empire. And so they weren't getting their oak casks from elsewhere in France, because we weren't part of France at that time. We were getting it from our friends in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, particularly the Hungarian part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So what's unique here is, again, the creativity of Alsatians going somewhere outside of the norm to put their wines in an aging vessel that's atypical of the region. So you find yet something very traditional, a very, very old site, very important site, but done just a little bit differently. And I think it really shows in the wine. The wine shows its maturity. You know, you get this hazelnut, honeyed, brown spice sorts of notes here. That's not atypical of Pinot Gris. My father and I used to fight all the time. We both agreed that Riesling was the number one varietal in Alsace, but then it was the fight over what's number two. And I always went for a Gewürztraminer because it was brash and it was in your face and very exotic. And he always went with Pinot Gris because it had all those things, but it was a bit more refined and a bit more restrained. And now as I've gotten older, I've come to kind of agree with my father that Pinot Gris is just as expressive as Gewürz, if not more, and really does tremendous things, particularly with maturity in the bottle. And I think this is no exception. Typically, Pinot Gris in Alsace is going to have more body. Like Gewürz, you might find more Pinot Gris and more Gewürz where you'll notice a little bit of the residual sugar. With the right food pairing, you don't even pay attention to that. And really, I think the question should be less about alcohol percentages and less about sugar and more about balance. Does this wine have all the kind of components? Does it have fruit? Does it have acidity? Does it have body? Is it all kind of working together? And then how does it work with food? I think those are the more important conversations that we should be having about wine, rather than getting hung up on things like alcohol and sugar.
Thanks for that, Nick. I'll make a note too that there are around, I'd say, around 50 different Grand Cru vineyard sites in Alsace. Do you know exactly how many more?
There are 51.
51.
So technically, each one of those is its own appellation d'origine contrôlée, which means that we have 53 in Alsace.
Wow.
And
we'll also say too that like not all grapes are permitted within the Grand Cru status. So it's Muscat, Riesling, Pinot Gris, and Gewürztraminer, which are the 4 primary Grand Cru.
So yeah, so you have Riesling, Pinot Gris, Gewürztraminer, Muscat Petit Grain, Muscat Tonnelle. There's one site for Sylvaner. There will soon be 2 sites for Pinot Noir. That's already existing sites for where Pinot Noir exists, or where it grows already, but doesn't have Grand Cru status. And then there's also 2 sites where we're allowed to do field blends. So that's Käferkopf, and Maurice Schoch does an example of the Käferkopf blend.
Is that Rangon? Is it Rangon de Tan? Is that how you pronounce it?
He also does the Rangon de Tan, but he does his Rangon de Tan as a field blend, and it's not allowed in that site, so he has to call it Cuvée R. So he just calls it R, but it's basically Rangon de Tan at a fraction of the price, and it's something. If you ever see, I should bring it back on the shelves, but if you ever see it, it's something to snap up pretty quickly, because it comes from an extraordinary site where, you know, the slopes are at about a 45-degree angle. It's this ancient volcano, and it's terraced, so it looks like this layered cake. And you know, you have to be when you're working the vineyard, it's essentially as if you were rock climbing. You have to have all that sort of gear in terms of being harnessed on to something on the top of the hill, and also have the proper shoe wear. Otherwise, you could really hurt yourself. Yeah.
I'll say too, I know we're running kind of close to our 7:30 time frame, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. But I just wanted to say about the Ungerberg Pinot Gris, it's definitely one of those wines that on the nose, you know, you don't quite know what to expect necessarily on the palate. It's definitely very different than like the typical white wines you're experiencing. And once again, it is a white wine with 10 years of age on it as well. But what I love about like the nose, I think you had mentioned, did you say hazelnut, Nick? But definitely like a lot of that like baked apple, like almost like that burnt caramel note that comes through. It's just so powerful on the nose, but it definitely tones down a lot more on the palate, though it still has that, you know, richness and that texture that Pinot Gris is known for. Well, before we kind of close things out, Nick, do you have any thoughts on pairings here, things that you love to do with Pinot Gris?
Pinot Gris really is that Pinot Gris. You know, a basic food and wine pairing principle is you want to match. You want to consider a couple things: weight of the wine and the expressiveness of the wine. So the more aromatic the wine, the more you want to pair it with a dish that's going to that's also going to be kind of exciting in terms of its aromatics. You also want to pair weight with weight. So you don't want to pair a full-bodied wine with something that's with a light-bodied dish. Pinot Gris, and this Pinot Gris probably in its youth was, you notice the residual sugar much more. It's pretty clean and dry here. The only way in which I noticed residual sugar here is really that it's just provided us with a little extra body and richness. So it gives a little that glycerol effect, and therefore more weight in the mouth. So because of that, you want to pair this with something that's going to be able to deal with, let's say I would pair this with cream-based dishes. Anything with white cream, it's going to go really well with. Less grilled, more roasted, more braised, something baked. You could do this with a tourte, so basically a meat pie. That's one of the typical things that we do up in the mountains. You can do this with, if you wanted to do a really nice raclette, you could certainly do this with some raclette. If you had maybe some meat on the side, it'll go pretty well. But you really want a type of meal that can also deal with the aromatics of Pinot Gris. So it's not as expressive as it was in its youth, but you can go in the way of Northern Indian cuisine, things that use cardamom in the dish. Maybe not cardamom because that's pretty expressive, but lesser brown spices that aren't as expressive. Something with Jamaican allspice will go pretty well with as well. But again, keep in mind this is an older wine, so it's a little bit more gentle. You don't want to go with super expressive spices here. A younger Pinot Gris absolutely is up for the challenge. An older Pinot Gris, kind of, keep it more mellow.
That makes sense. Well, any questions like before? What we'll do is we'll let people stay on too afterwards if you want to ask some questions too, not with the group, but any questions so far, any feedback or thoughts on any of the wines that you'd like to share?
Nick, how about with this last wine, the rabbit and mustard sauce?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Particularly old style mustard, it can deal with some of that heat. Keep in mind, the alcohol here is pretty reasonable. I think it's 13.5. Pinot Gris and Gewürz can get higher in alcohol. That's one of the ways that, or being organic or green on some level, helps to kind of balance off the total ripeness of the wine, because sugar is one of those first things that develops when a grape ripens. So yeah, absolutely. Rabbit and mustard sauce would be great. Maybe with this, take it a little bit easier on the mustard sauce. You don't want it super spicy and in your face, but just enough so that you notice it in the dish. Maybe it almost makes your mouth kind of hum, but not exactly.
Yeah, I'm thinking like a mustard cream sauce. Exactly.
Mustard cream with something that's got a little earthy aromatic. So you could throw in some mushrooms in here, would make this really quite good. Because mushrooms have that earthy, a little of that funk, and there's some of that here with an older Pinot Gris.
Well, I'll also note too, so something just exciting to bring up is we actually have a winemaker coming into town in the Boston area, for those of you who are in the Boston area, which is something we haven't had in quite some time. And he's an Alsatian winemaker and one of the most famous of Alsace, Jean Trimbach of Trimbach Winery. So he's coming into town on February 16th. And we're putting together a wine dinner, which I'll have more details as of tomorrow, but it will be at Branchline in Watertown. And we're putting together a little 4-course dinner with about 8 or 9 of his wines to pair with. So if anybody is interested, just feel free to stay on the Zoom, or you can, of course, Scott, I was going to reach out to you. But of course, if you just want to shoot me an email too, I'm happy to send you the details before I send it out to everybody. Hopefully when people come into town more often, I'd love to let CruBox members know about some of those opportunities in advance. So it's just a kind of fun way to get to know the region a little bit more from one of its most classic producers. So I hope that you guys had fun tonight. This was definitely an amazing overview from Nick. So I wanted to thank you so much. This has been awesome. And he's such a wealth of knowledge for any of you that are ever in the Waltham area and get to go to the Main Street location in Waltham. Nick can always help you find some of the most amazing wines ever, not just from Alsace, but from all over. So I'm also happy to connect any of you two with him at any time, because he's such a wealth of knowledge, and it's always so much fun to get to bring in some of our other amazing colleagues at Gordon's. So I want to thank you, Nick, so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Fun being with you guys. We have next week, we'll actually have our February CruBox, which will be focused on some of the most classic regions in the world. So we'll get to dabble all over, but focusing on Germany, France, and Italy. So we can't wait to bring you some more amazing wines. And as always, please use me as a resource if you ever have any questions or any feedback that you want to throw at me, please go for it. But it's always just so much fun being with you all. And once again, I'll stick around here. I don't know, Nick, if you have to get back, but you can choose to stick around too if anybody wants.
I'll around if anybody has any questions.
Cool.
I will say one thing. If anybody has been to the region, then you know how beautiful it is. But if you've never been, probably the best way is to fly into Frankfurt. You can do the Alsatian wine route pretty quickly. There's Strasbourg and Colmar if you want a little bit of the city. There's also running parallel to the Alsatian wine route is the medieval castle route. Alsace has more medieval castles than any other region in all of Europe. And it follows the ridgeline of the Vosges, so above the mountains or above the vineyards in the mountains. It's a pretty exciting region to go if you like to not only drink wine, but eat and hike and bike and see a little history.
Let's go. That's awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being with us. Once again, we'll stick around, but it's just a wonderful evening. I feel like I got to learn a lot too, which is always so much fun for me. So I just wanted to thank you, Nick, so much. And I hope you all enjoyed the wines.
Thank you. It was
Thank
great.
you, Charles. Thank you, Nick. It was great. It was really
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Evening. Awesome. And feel free to stick around if you'd like. Christina, it was so nice to meet you. I'm glad you enjoyed the wines. It was nice to see your cats.
Oh, sorry. But it doesn't really matter what room I'm in. They're just
I was talking about that post that you sent out about unboxing with your cats. They're really cute. So thank you.
that was them. That was them.
It's nice to meet you.
Oh, it's nice to meet you too. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. I'm so glad you enjoyed. So good. Awesome. Morgan and Skylar, did you enjoy the wines?
I'm super intrigued by this Pinot Gris.
I know.
Yeah, we're drinking that too. This is
Yeah.
So wait, Chelsea, we in the Pinot Gris, we are having trouble. We are tasting like notes of honey, but we are having really a lot of trouble tasting the caramel. Maybe because they're similar and we're getting them confused. But we just taste more honey than caramel.
I think that there's definitely a lot of honey, but there's also for me like that little bit of that like burnt caramel. Like for me, it's just that about like
Yeah.
notes is like everybody's maybe gonna get something a little bit different. And if you don't, burnt caramel is just anything per se, but it's a pretty contemplative wine in terms of like the aromatics and the tasting profile, and it's also just like quite just striking. When I first like opened it and I stuck my nose in the glass, I remember just thinking to myself like, wow, this is not what I necessarily expected, but I don't always get the opportunity to taste Pinot Gris with a lot of age on it like this. It's just something that doesn't always come across.
Yeah, when I first put my nose in the glass, I immediately thought of like older Chenin Blanc.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
But then when I taste it, it doesn't have the acid that Chenin Blanc has.
Yeah,
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I think the apple too as like being one of the primary aromatics that like is like that tie in there.
This is also kind of wine I would take to like Thanksgiving with my family
Yeah.
and pour a taste for people, and they would not like it, so I could save the whole bottle for myself. This is not like a crowd pleaser for new wine drinkers. So,
No,
hey,
Hi, Remy.
Cameo, what's up,
what's up,
guys?
Matt?
Hey, Scott, what's up, man?
How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. Just getting home, getting ready to have some spicy chicken ramen. Wow.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Have plenty of wine to pair with it.
Yes, I know. I'm probably gonna grab something in a second.
Yeah, grab the Pinot Blanc with that.
I'll be back.
Oh, this is great. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, it was so great to see you, Faith and Glenn. You guys are doing
I definitely want to learn more about the wine dinner on the
Oh
16th.
yeah, I'll send out some information tomorrow.
Great.
I just got
Yeah.
today.
I'm definitely in, and I texted my couple of other couples, told them to save the date. So that would be great.
I have some friends who might be interested as well.
Chelsea, when is it?
It's on February 16th, which I think is a Wednesday night. I have to double check that.
It is.
Yeah, we'd be interested. I think that'd be
Yeah,
fun.
it's fun. It's just so funny because there hasn't been a lot of people coming into town with COVID, and it's interesting. We're partnering with some of the Boston wine and food festival events coming up, but they don't have a lot of winemakers that have come into town due to like some COVID and all these reasons. So I was surprised that Jean Trimbach was coming into town, but I think he comes in. He used to come in every year to have Valentine's Day with his wife at the Boston Harbor Hotel. And that was like something that was like really special for him.
Aw.
So I think he's probably continuing that tradition, I would imagine. So it's really, really, he's just like such a nice, wonderful man and so interesting. So it's definitely going to be a lot of fun, but it's going to be a really interesting parallel because the wines of Trimbach, especially the Grand Cru wines, have been just increasing in price so much. So it's interesting getting to taste some of the wines like we tasted tonight from Schoch or from Bechtold, because it's just, the value is just crazy. So it's very interesting. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Great. Thank you.
Cool.
yeah,
Forward to February.
I second that. Jean Trimbach is very dynamic, very passionate about not only the family winery, but also about the region, and is one of those family who's a part of a family that against the Grand Cru system for a very, very, very long time.
Wow.
But didn't think it was up to par. So they've changed that a little bit in recent years with the newer generations coming in. But if you go, you'll be able to talk to him about that. And let me tell you, if you open up that subject with him, he will go on for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
What's interesting to
Maybe
me-
we should not talk to him about that.
I mean, if you don't want him to talk about it, then yeah, don't open it up. But you can certainly, if you want to ask that leading question, you certainly can.
So it's interesting. So we usually have like come into town in years past, we'd have Jean Humbrecht come in, and then we'd have, Jean Trimbach come in, and then we'd have Olivier Humbrecht from Zine Humbrecht.
Yeah.
And I was just talking to the importer who imports these Zine Humbrecht wines about the fact that like we've been having some pretty serious trouble with their like recent vintages, like not having much wine to send over here. I don't know, Nick, if you do anything like that. But Olivier is not coming to the market because he just doesn't have much wine.
Wow.
So, and
Interesting.
also has been having trouble at the winery in terms of just like production issues.
That's true. There have been some, particularly in recent years, there have been some, let's say, more challenging vintages. Olivier is going to be the first to say there's no bad vintage. There's a bad vigneron. So you have to be ready for what nature throws at you. And sometimes nature, a few vintages after another, will throw a lot of hard things at you. That's one of the reasons why he's biodynamic, is in being a proponent of biodynamics, is that your site, generally speaking, is more resistant to the challenges that nature poses. It still, of course, can mean that you're going to have less wine to produce. And Alsace the United States is a massive market for Alsace. I mean, I know I used to work as the export manager for Alsatian Winery, but that being said, Olivier's wines are so well known elsewhere. They're really greatly appreciated in Japan, for instance, that he has other markets that he can sell to as well. So he's trying to make sure that he has a little something for all of his markets. One of the people that I used to work with for him, and Olivier, he's a businessman, but he wants to make sure that everybody has an equal opportunity to have his wine. So he prefer one market over another. So if he's got less wine, then there's just less wine to go around, and that's that. And he loves coming to the States, so it's not like he doesn't like the coming to the States. It's just perhaps this season of I like to call it the season of COVID tide. It's a bit more challenging too, and that combined with a few years of lower production doesn't necessarily make it economically viable to come.
Makes sense.
So
Awesome. Scott, how are things going with you? Any good hunting that you've been up to?
Yeah, I just got back from South Georgia. Took my son quail hunting.
actually,
Oh, did we lose Nicholas? Yeah, I just went quail hunting down in South Georgia last weekend. Took my son. Yeah, my son came, and then my dad flew down, met us